the Grenfell Tower was to be taken down. Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner held a meeting with bereaved families and survivors to talk to them about it first. Then on Friday came the official announcement. Joining me now is Mark Anthony, editor of Demolition News, with us. Mark, good morning. Thanks for joining us. Now, we've been told that the process is expected to take around 2 years and will be done sensitively. What does this mean?
To be honest, this is the first time I've ever heard of a demolition being done sensitively. Obviously, this is a different set of circumstances to that which most demolition contractors would be dealing with. But I think the methodology will be driven more by the location than the sensitivity thing. There's not enough room there for explosive demolition. There's not enough room for what we refer to as a high-reach demolition machine. So effectively, the methodology will be to lower some machines onto the roof and then munch it down, within its own footprint, largely out of view. If you're watching it over a period of weeks and months, you'll see the tower shrinking, but you won't really see any demolition going on, which, given the circumstances and given the background, is probably the best way forward.
There is so much emotion around this, understandably. What difference will it make? I mean, how hard would it be to be doing something like this?
I actually wrote something about this about 3 weeks ago, questioning who would actually want the contract because of that sensitivity. And it cuts both ways. Obviously, the biggest concern is for the bereaved families and the local community there, but also for the demolition workers themselves. We're going to be asking them to go and work in an area where 72 people perished unnecessarily, which is a problem in itself. Technically, not a problem. Tower blocks are coming down up and down the country all the time, but this one is going to be very, very different. And I think even things like, making sure that the work crew there don't take selfies, because that would be insensitive, obviously. Even protecting the bricks and the rubble that come out of there, just in case somebody decides,
what do they call them? They call them... Is it like a grief scavenger or something like that? Do you know what I mean? Like, people who go out looking for mementos of buildings. I mean, you look at some of the historical buildings of the past where they've demolished them, and they have to do it so that people don't try and scavenge parts off it.
Yeah, it's very true. Listen, I'm a West Ham fan. I've got a piece of the West Ham stadium because I was there when it was being demolished. But that was over and done with. There was no emotion. Well, apart from my own, there was no emotion involved in that whatsoever. But yes, that is a very real concern. In modern demolition terms, we always monitor, the material that comes out, because a lot of it would be recycled or reused. In this instance, I think it will be monitored even more closely because, as you say, you will have these potentially grief scavengers looking to make a fast buck on eBay out of some sort of ghoulish idea that they've got.
Did the government have to make this decision now, Mark?
I believe so, yeah. There was a demolition contractor who was actually in Grenfell Tower within hours of the fire actually being put out. And there's been, ever since the thing happened, there's been question marks about the stability and integrity of the building. Obviously, it would have suffered a fair degree, a lot of fire damage. It would have suffered water damage as a result of the work of the firefighters. And then, of course, you've had it dilapidated for the last 8 years. There's no heating on there, so it would have been exposed to extremes of heat and cold. So yes, I feel for the families. I really, really do, and I understand those that want to see it retained as a monument. But the flip side of that, but looking at it from a purely practical point of view, if a chunk of that were to fall off and hurt or possibly kill somebody, that's even worse. So I do think they've taken the right approach.
Mark, I've got so many questions, but obviously, look, I'm trying to hold it down effectively. Will they try and preserve parts of the building? We talked about sort of grief hunters and grief scavengers. Will they maybe try and preserve parts of it with a future memorial in mind? Because effectively, and we highlighted this point the other day, there's still people's remains in that building. Effectively, there's people's lives still in there. There's people's possessions. There's belongings. There's all sorts in there.
In actual fact, that is one of the things that demolition contractors are increasingly encouraged to do. We're working on a process now where we're not really demolishing, we're deconstructing. So it will be picked apart piece by piece. So, I don't know what the idea is in terms of, restoring people's possessions to to their rightful owners, because that nobody's actually been given the job as yet. But that would be perfectly feasible. But certainly using parts of the building, demolition is encouraged to do that all the time. We're trying to salvage as much as we possibly can because there is intrinsic value. There's embodied carbon that's gone into the manufacture of the concrete and the steel and everything else, and we would look to retain that. And yes, it would. I do think it would be highly suitable. When you look at the memorial at Ground Zero in New York, they preserved some of the Twin Towers and they used it in there. I think that would be wholly appropriate.
You talk about a demolition contractor maybe struggling or not wanting to take the contract. Do you see it going that way? Do you see people maybe not sort of being scared or intimidated? I don't know really what the word is, but maybe just being put off taking that contract?
I think that the commercial imperative will mean that somebody will step forward, and there are several contractors that would be very, very capable of doing it. But this is probably going to be one of the most challenging demolition projects they've ever taken on. Taking down a tower block is all in a day's work, but everything that goes around it, as I say, monitoring their staff and making sure that they're not being disrespectful in any way. But even things like community liaison, regardless of your personal feelings on, the previous government, the current government, community liaison on this project is going to be absolutely vital.
Huge.
And I think the demolition contractor involved will be, holding regular meetings with bereaved families, with the community, with schools, possibly even inviting school children along to actually have a look around and see what they're doing, but forewarning people as well. If there's a particularly destructive part of demolition coming up that is going to intrinsically change the way that the building looks, I think, to let them know that well in advance would be a very, very sensible thing to do.
It's going to be very, very tough, isn't it? Very, very tough indeed. Mark, really appreciate your time and your honesty this morning. Thank you so much for joining us. That is Mark Anthony, editor of Demolition News. From 10 a.m. this morning, Eddie Nestor will have more on this story as a petition has been launched to pause the decision to dismantle the tower. 8:21, good morning. Breakfast, BBC Radio London. We'll have more on the Super Bowl next. BBC.